the Chapter 2.1 overview, the Silk Roads, circa 1200 to 1450. So let's look at our essential question. What were the causes and effects of the growth of networks of exchange after 1200? This one's pretty clear. It's a causation question. The key words, of course, are causes and effects. And one thing we want to focus on is that we were looking for both of those. So we should have both causes and effects. Remember, sometimes with causation we might have one or the other, and in this we should have each of them. Our world has become more interconnected of late, a trend that began centuries ago as regional marketplaces expanded into continent-spanning networks of exchange. You might remember this graph from the summer assignment. From 1800 to the present, basically, it shows a massive increase in the value of global exports, which is evidence that countries are trading internationally at a greater and greater extent. This development was caused by the same market forces that motivate us today, so it's helpful to study ancient motivations and shed light on our own. The Han Dynasty ruled China from about 200 BCE to about 200 CE, at the same time as the rise of the Roman Empire in Europe. The Silk Roads trade was active then, and continued to grow during the time we are studying. So this map shows the ancient Silk Roads route, and if you look at the current map that's in your textbook, you'll see that it's quite similar. And again, the Han Dynasty was back in the classical era about 2,000 years ago. Your textbook refers to this time as the first golden age of Silk Roads trade, before it goes on to discuss the second. It's also useful for us to think back to Chapter 1.1 and the economic growth of China during the Song Dynasty. So developments like gunpowder and guns, silks and porcelain, and steel manufacturing made China the envy of Eurasia and the most sought-after trade destination. In this chapter, we will see the causes and effects of the second golden age of Silk Roads trade. So let's look at the causes of the growth of exchange networks, and again, this chapter will focus on Silk Roads trade. By the time we get to our time period, starting around 1200, Silk Roads trade was still ongoing, but it slowed down a bit. Islamic control of the Middle East and the weakening of the Byzantine Empire limited access to the East. The Byzantine Empire had occupied this region of Eastern Europe right about here, and as it became weaker, it blocked access for Europeans to the Silk Roads trade route, especially this one that went down here through the Mediterranean. Europe had not yet developed the technology to sail directly to Asia around Africa, so they had to access goods along the Silk Roads, mainly waiting for traders to bring goods to Europe's doorstep. Goods also came to Europe along the Mediterranean, having reached there through Indian Ocean trade. So I just talked about the Silk Roads bringing goods to them, and of course there's this route that goes up here through what is now Russia. And Indian Ocean trade, if you follow this line up here through the Red Sea, it would then go overland to the Mediterranean, and goods could come to Europe, both southern Europe through the Mediterranean here, and then all the way around up to northern Europe. Chinese products like paper, gunpowder, porcelain, and silk were in high demand, especially among the European upper classes. A new golden age of Silk Roads trade was initiated by the Mongols, who we will learn about in the next chapter. For now, we can point out that in the late 13th century, Mongol armies conquered most of Asia, and for the first time, a single empire linked China across the continent to the edge of Europe. The Mongols were big supporters of commerce, and Silk Roads trade flourished for about 200 years. So the tan on this map is the Mongol Empire, and because that region that spanned from China almost to Europe was under the control of one ruler, starting with Genghis Khan, it really helped to facilitate the trade. Now we'll look at some improvements in transportation. Camel caravans were the most efficient transport across the desert, and also the safest. This became the most common method of moving goods across the Eurasian landscape. Advancements in maritime technology developed in China include the compass and the rudder, which aided in piloting ships to destinations faster. The junk was the largest ship of its kind, able to carry a great deal of cargo. So the picture on the bottom right here is a Chinese junk, and this area down here would be the cargo hold, where it would hold all of the goods that could be transported along the Indian Ocean trade. And then the rudder down here allows for superior navigation in terms of getting to your destination. With traders able to ship more goods to their destination more quickly, profits naturally grew. As these technologies made their way across Asia and into Europe, trade continued to grow. The Silk Roads crossed forbidding desert terrain, so stopping points were crucial for its success. This trade network is known as a relay trade, meaning the traders rarely cross the whole distance, but move back and forth between stopping points. So the red line on the map here is not meant to be a start and end journey, but lots of way stations along the way. The journey was made by camel caravans like the one in the bottom right, and caravanserai, such as the one on the left, were important places to rest or trade camels. Camels can travel about 100 miles without water, so buildings like these were spaced about that far apart. Cities that sprung up because of their access to rivers played an important role too. Kashgar and Samarkand both played an economic and cultural role. Here is Samarkand, right here in kind of Central Asia, and then Kashgar is here, and you can see that they're both along this main Silk Road's trade route. In addition to trading goods like textiles, traders also exchanged ideas such as religion. It was through this process that Buddhism spread to China from India. Islam played an important role too, especially in Samarkand, which was known for its mosques. And there's a picture of a mosque in that area in the bottom left. In ancient times, traders bartered by exchanging goods of equal wealth. This is where the term trade comes from. Eventually, coins were developed to represent wealth, and the Silk Road's trade began using coins such as the copper ones used in China, shown here in the center. This presents problems as trade links more diverse regions, and two financial solutions helped. Flying cash, developed in China, worked like a bank account, allowing a merchant to deposit cash and withdraw it in a different location. And this picture here is an example of a flying cash note that is the precursor to paper money. European traders used the same idea in early banks of the 1300s. A bill of exchange worked like a check or debit card, allowing a trader to present a note guaranteeing money to use as currency. Both of these innovations had the effect of encouraging the growth of trade, as they made it easier for people of different cultures to trade goods after traveling long distances. In the last unit, we looked at how Europe was rather decentralized during this time period. This made it hard for governments to protect trade, so a group of cities in northern Europe joined together to form the Hanseatic League, shown on the map below. The League was able to protect ships from pirates and finance expensive voyages around the coast of Western Europe to the Mediterranean, where they could pick up Asian goods and bring them back to northern Europe. So the Hanseatic League is shown in this region right here. This is kind of a close-up of northern Europe. Here's a little bit of England here, and then this is Scandinavia, Norway and Sweden here. And then if you look at this zoomed out map of Europe, the Hanseatic League is along this region of northern Europe, and the ships would be able to sail around the coast of Western Europe like this and into the Mediterranean. Thus the League helped to bring more Asian goods to northern Europe, making those cities and governments richer. Be sure to look at the innovations chart on page 81. It's a good overview of key developments that helped Silk Road's trade grow. Finally, a quick note about the effects of this expanding trade in China. As demand grew, more goods were produced in China and other Asian states. Back in chapter 1.1, you learned about proto-industrialization in China, the small-scale manufacture of steel and porcelain. Now we can see why that process happened, as it grew to meet the demand of those goods and send them off on the caravans and ocean voyages to Europe and Asia. So this chapter talks a lot about processes and kind of big picture topics, but there are a couple of events that I put on the timeline. The first is the Mongol conquest of the Abbasid Caliphate, and that's partly there because it frees up European access to the Silk Road's trade. Remember that it was the Islamic government that sort of blocked that access, and we talked about how the Mongol conquest initiated a more unified trade across that region. And then the Hanseatic League in the 13th century was that organization that helped to protect European shipping and bring goods from the Mediterranean, which had reached there from Asia, all the way around Europe to northern Europe. So now for the essential question, we had the causes and the effects of the growth of networks of exchange. Some things to think about for causes. Why did Silk Road's trade grow? The huge demand for Asian goods like gunpowder, silk, and porcelain. The unity in the Mongol Empire and the fact that the Mongols encouraged trade. And improvements in transportation technology for the Silk Roads, especially the camel caravans and the caravanserai. And then remember, on Indian Ocean trade, we had the navigation technology like the compass and the rudder, and then also the Chinese junk, the large cargo ship. Now for the effects of the growth of the exchange networks. It does result in the growth of cities like Kashgar and Samarkand, and in oasis towns that are important centers of trade and cultural exchange. It results in commercial innovations, that's the flying cash and the bill of exchange. And it also results in the increased production of goods in Asia and Europe. Starting with Asia, we talked about the proto-industrialization, steel, for instance, and guns. And then as that technology, through this increased interaction, reaches Europe, it also stimulates production in Europe, generally of the same things. That's your Chapter 2.1 overview. Happy studying!